Welcome back to Perkins Pipes. I want to bring out this elegant little meerschaum, this MSMS meerschaum that I purchased some time ago in at the Briar and the Burley, an excellent brick and mortar store in Bloomington, Indiana. What we're going to talk about today is a bit of an elegant topic, and so for that, we need an elegant pipe. As always, friends, let's get this guy lit. Let's get to talking. Want to talk about God today, and that may or may not be the God of the Christian faith. We'll leave that for you to determine. And for a bit more of a teaser, we're going to talk about God the Goat. Goat as in greatest of all time. And you're saying, Steve, you're confusing me here. What are we talking about? I want to talk about something from a purely philosophical perspective. The existence of God. And that's why I say this may or may not be regarding Christianity. Christianity is very specific. When a Christian says God, he or she means one being eternally existing in three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And all that goes with that. That through the Word, everything was created. The Word is the second person of the Trinity, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, as the Gospel of John says, that Word took on a name, Jesus. All of that very, very, very specific. What I want to talk about right now is simply the philosophical, or a philosophical proof for the existence of a God. Now, whether that God is the Christian God, whether it's Thor, whether it's Zeus, that's for you to determine. Okay, everybody's got to make up his or her own mind. But whether there is a God at all, actually, that isn't necessarily a matter of faith. It is something that can be proved philosophically. Now, there's a number of proofs for the existence of God. The one I want to talk about today is the ontological argument. Ontological, a word having to do with existence and being. It's a Greek-rooted word. And this is a proof that was thought up by a fellow named Anselm. Saint Anselm of Canterbury, who lived from 1033 to 1109. So my first question is, who are your favorite thinkers from the 11th century? Do you have any favorite people from the 11th century? Pretty far back there. And in one of his works called the Proslogion, he said this, and I'm gonna pull up the text here for myself, just because I want to get this exactly right. He wrote in Latin, and he said, "Credimus te esse aliquid quo nihil maius cogitari possit." He said, we believe that you, he's actually talking to God in this work, and he certainly believed that God is the God of Christianity, the God of the Christian faith, the only true God. And he says to God, he says, we believe that you are that than which no greater can be conceived. Aliquid quo nihil maius cogitari possit. That than which no greater can be conceived. Now, what on earth does that mean? Let's talk it through. He gives a particular example, and I may or may not come back to his example, but I'm going to give a different example. You can imagine right now a stack of $1 million sitting on your table. Right? Take a moment. Think about it. Whether it's $1 million $1 bills, it's all in 20s or hundreds or a mix of denominations, but you can imagine $1 million. That's pretty great thing to imagine, right? Okay, now, what if that $1 million were actually, for real, sitting on your table? Which is greater? Which is greater? The idea of $1 million or actually existing $1 million? I don't think there's any of us who would say, I'm content just with the thought of $1 million. We're going to say, show me the money, baby. I want the actual physical dinero. I want the moolah. I want the greenbacks, baby. I want the long green, okay? So we have this notion that something existing in reality is greater than merely the idea of that thing. Now, St. Anselm actually gives the example of a painter. He says, imagine a painter who has an idea in his mind. In fact, let me bring that up. What he says here. Let's see here. He says, nam cum pictor praecogitat quae facturus est, habet quidem in intellectum. He says, when a painter thinks about what is going to be, he has an idea in his mind, right? He has it in his mind. Sed nondum intelliget esse quod nondum fecit. But he understands that it does not exist yet because he has not made it. Cum vero jam pinxit, but when he has painted it, et habet in intellectu, et intelligit esse quod jam fecit. He has it in his mind, and he knows that it exists because he has made it. All right? Somebody once had an idea for a lighter that would stay lit better in windy outdoor conditions. It was all up here. It was an idea. It's the kind of thing my son might come up with. He's an industrial designer. Then someday, somebody actually produced the Zippo pipe lighter, right? Now, the idea of a pipe lighter dedicated to lighting pipes, kind of protecting against the wind, it exists not only in idea, but it exists in reality. And most people would agree that there is something more, there's something greater about something that exists in reality than something that merely exists in the mind. Now, you can imagine, obviously people from DC Comics and Marvel Comics have done this kind of thing. You can imagine a super fast individual. You could imagine a super tall individual, super strong individual. You could imagine a being that maxes out all the possible characteristics of any being. You could imagine a being such that there is no being anywhere that is faster, smarter, more loving, more powerful, whatever. Right? You can max out every possible characteristic, right? And we would say that is the greatest possible being, right? Because if I think of a being that is really, really great, but then I can think of another being that's even greater, well, then that other thing, right? That other being now is the greatest of all time, the GOAT. But we've already realized that even greater than something existing in the mind is something that exists in reality as well. So Anselm's argument goes like this. He says, look, we can imagine a greatest of all time being. Most people, most cultures would call that being God. A being that is greater, again, everything, right? Every possible characteristic, smarter, more powerful, all-knowing, able to exist everywhere. Every possible characteristic is maxed out. Now, the thing is, if you only imagine that, and then that is not real, then it isn't really quite the greatest of all time now, is it? Let that sink in. I've imagined a being that's the greatest of all time. But if that being does not actually exist, then it is not, in fact, the greatest of all time. So I have not, in fact, imagined a being that is the greatest of all time. But obviously, I can imagine a being that is the greatest of all time. And if I imagine a being that is the greatest of all time, one than which no greater can be thought of, then for that to be a true idea, for that to be a true conception, that being must actually exist. Now, I have to say, I've liked that argument for years. I find it quite compelling. Deep philosophical people will say, yeah, some people have come along over the years and have found what we call defeaters of that argument. Well, I think it's a pretty strong one. I think it's a pretty strong one. I like that one. I like it for its elegance. Elegant like this pipe. Now, it takes a moment to get your head around. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with me going to church on Sunday or reading my Bible or anything like that? I don't need to go through those mental gymnastics to worship God. And you know what? You don't. You're absolutely right. You don't have to go through mental gymnastics to worship God. But I'll say this. If you're talking with someone who says, I don't even know that I believe that there is a God, I'm not sure you can jump right into the Trinity with them. All right? I don't know you can jump right in to say, well, here, let me show you in the Bible. Dude, I don't know that I believe that the Bible is telling the truth. I think you've got to start back a little earlier in the argument. So you might find it helpful to have this one kind of in your back pocket. If you're talking with somebody who isn't really sure that there is a God, the ontological argument is a good one. God is that than which no greater can be conceived. And if you want, you can use the money example that I gave you. Just as an actual pile of $1 million is greater than the thought of $1 million. So, if I have an idea of a greatest of all time being, in order actually to have that idea, that being must exist. Because if that being does not exist, then I have not actually thought of the greatest of all time being. Oh, that was deep. That's deep. Those old boys from the 11th century, they thought deep. All right? So talk to us about this. Talk to us about, and I really want to keep it philosophical, if you will. What do you think about various philosophical arguments for the existence of God? You could go back to the idea of an unmoved first mover, Now we're thinking Aristotle, we're thinking St. Thomas Aquinas. You could think of the argument from design, and maybe we'll talk about that one at some point. What do you think about the ontological argument? Had you heard of this argument, this philosophical argument for the existence of God before? What do you think of this argument? Folks, I'd love to hear what you think. As Malcolm Guite likes to say, I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. Or as I like to say in Latin, Parva ago ut tandem. Nihil agam. Have a wonderful day.